Welcome to The Grounds, a podcast with the purpose of being an honest, non-conforming stomping ground where we discuss topics around shadow work, the messiness of our psychic human makeup, remaining grounded in our bodies while staying spiritually connected to our soul's essence, and where we push the edges and challenge the collective hive mind. I'm your host, Simone. I'm a psycho-spiritual guide and owner of Rooted in Between, a place where shadow integration meets grounded spirituality. Today, I would like to share with you some insights of why going straight to the root of trauma, as some modalities sometimes suggest, why that may actually not even be possible, and also what may be happening around it that doesn't make this possible. And I'm going to share this from a parts work perspective as an internal family systems practitioner, but also from navigating my own inner system. So from lived experience as I was really learning to dive into my system and see what's actually happening there, and discovering that I had a very complex system. And through my personal observation and interactions with all of my parts, I can share a lot of insights of how these things are actively happening possibly within you, and you may be able to recognize some patterns or parts within you as you're listening to these insights. And what I'm sharing today, it's just one version of how it can show up. Our internal world can be very complex. Our parts are complex, and we're all individuals. And there's different things that can come up. But today I'm just going to share some insight with you, and you may be able to go and inquire with yourself or observe yourself a little bit and see if this particular scenario that I'll be talking about may apply to you. Now, I'm going to disclaim here that some of the things I share, a lot of times I actually record thoughts or things that I want to share while I'm out hiking with my dog, because that's a place where I process and inspiration comes. So I on the spot record things because that's when they feel most natural to me. And I actually don't like to edit them too much because I find it takes out it removes the energy that comes with the transmission from that very moment. And I don't like to pick things apart and then restructure them too much in a way that it's just perfectly fitting, like the podcast layout. Again, I do find that can sometimes remove nuances that were actually very important the way I shared. And that's just very personal to me. So we'll be simply switching over into a share that I recently recorded that I wanted to make available, and I hope you enjoy that. So here we go. I want to share some insight on the concept with parts work and when we work with parts and what happens and why it's sometimes so difficult to release the root cause. So if you're familiar with parts work, you may have experienced this. If not, just imagine how this could actually occur. Let's say you have a pattern, a behavior, something that just recreates itself in your life, and it keeps causing pain. It's like it keeps actually causing you almost to re-traumatize it. Or you may even just be aware that you have a part of you that holds pain from trauma, whether that's grief, fear, anything. And you may already be aware of that, yet it keeps coming up. It keeps recreating situations in your life that re-trigger that. And usually that's the part, trying to make itself known and say, hey, I still need help. And then, sometimes we start to try to connect with these parts and hold space for them. And then what happens for many people is other parts come up. We may feel resentful towards the part. We may feel angry. We may feel frustrated or annoyed that it's still here. And the message could be, it's like, this is so old. Why am I still carrying this? Why can't it just go away? I've done so much work. So you notice how there's actually another cluster of parts forming around. And these parts have stories too, and they have burdens too. And when we start to really listen to them, so even if this part is like, why can't this just go away? Like, it's so angry that the pain is still here, right? For one, it wants the pain to go away, which that makes total sense. And you probably may even be like, yeah, it makes sense. That makes sense. And it wants the pain to go away because now you can ask the part, but as an example, it could be that it's like, well, I just want to be able to live life. I just want to be able to have healthy relationships. I want to not always this to always come up. And from there, we can say, wow, that makes sense. How beautiful it is that you have a part that's actually trying to advocate for you, that says, I just want you to be able to live life. I want you to be able to be loving and have healthy relationships. And that's why it's so angry at the part of you that's still holding the trauma and still holding the pain. And here's what's also happening. So these parts that are surrounding the trauma, they also need space to be heard. And at times we're not able to get to the root cause because these parts have not had a chance to express themselves. Sometimes we also have other parts around that create certain behaviors because they're so afraid that if we let the part come up that holds the trauma, that this could be dangerous. So what's important to understand is that all our parts, the traumatized parts and even the parts around, they only know the stories that have already happened. They know the story that has happened in the past that caused a trauma. And even the ones that say, why aren't you not over it? They only see what happened. They only see what has been created in life. None of our parts actually see the future or the possibilities of the future until we make it intentionally known to them, and also intentionally making known our intentions. So here's the thing. We actually have to start working with the parts that are around the trauma and get them on board with our intention, which is to help the traumatized part release some of the burden, which then helps everybody. But the parts don't know that because they're just doing their job and they only know their own stories. So again, the part that's angry is just holding its anger because, well, nothing happens. Another part may be like, oh, but what if you talk to the traumatized part and then you're going to feel all this pain and all this trauma. You can't handle that because all this part, the one that's afraid to bring up the pain of the trauma, all it knows, it's the little child potentially, if that's when the trauma happened, that wasn't able to handle the pain. So we actually need to update these parts. For one, that we're not little children anymore. And then our intentions. And sometimes that requires us to build trust. And that trust is built from self, from our core self, that is grounded in reality and is also grounded in its being. But this is a reason why often we can't release the core trauma is because we have to acknowledge and work with the parts that are around and gain their trust. Now, let's say we're working with the part that's angry. That's like, I just want this pain to go away. How can we work with that part? So we can actually engage with our system, with our parts, just like we engage with other humans. That's the really cool thing. As long as we come from the center itself, we can talk to our parts because they're all basically different energies of our psyche that have created, and to a degree, they're all fragmented parts of us. And they also make up our individuality. So without going into that, let's say we're talking to the angry part and we can say, hey, it makes so much sense that you're angry. I see that your intention is to help me be able to live my life, and you're just really angry and frustrated that this pain is still here. That makes so much sense. Like, thank you for trying to advocate for me. I really appreciate that. And here's my question for you. If I was able to connect with the part that holds the trauma, and I was able to help it release some of its burdens, and actually not having to hold all of it itself, and release some of the pain it's holding on to, so it doesn't have to recreate these strong feelings all the time to get my attention or to get your attention. Would you want me to go and help it? And there's different scenarios that can happen. Some parts are like, absolutely, please go, please finally do that. But they weren't aware that you're actually able to do that until you let them know you can do that, because it hasn't happened so far. They're not aware that there's something else present that is actually able to interact with those parts and hold those parts. Now, depending what part you interact with, you could make that suggestions of like, hey, what if I could go and help it? Another part may simply say, that's too dangerous. You can't go and feel that pain. That could be a protective part, right? I mean, they're all protective in their own ways. So they might not want to let you go there. So you may have to build more trust. You know, this concept really comes down to start to treating ourselves like the concept of having fragmented parts is something that becomes much more widely known now. There's a lot of people that understand the concept of fragmentation, soul fragmentation, and that we have different aspects. But it does require really some work with it to really become personally aware of that is what's happening, not just intellectually, but actually working with your system. I'm like, understanding there's all these parts around. And then we also need to be honest with our system and say, look, the story happened. The trauma happened. The story will not go away. But I can help hold the pain, because so far, usually it's the other parts that are holding the pain or are witnessing the pain, and that's all they see. So they need to learn to trust that we are able to do that from our core self. But again, this does require us to develop trust, and that's why oftentimes just going for the root core trauma, like some other modalities suggest, of like just go in and pluck it out, isn't always possible, because from the concept of IFS, or the internal family systems, we are trying to bypass the other parts. And if we bypass them and we're not successful with the reintegration of our parts or actually showing up from self, because usually the parts that are just trying to go to the root cause, like straight in, are also protective parts. So it's not done from core self, it's coming from a different place. And if we're bypassing parts and we're not giving them the space, they're going to come back up. So maybe this gives you a little bit of better understanding of why we can't always just get a root trauma, but also B, that there is much more around, like there's many more parts usually involved, and more so that the way they experience or their experience is usually only in the past from when they developed. So if your trauma was developed, let's say at the age of 5, you have the traumatized parts, and then maybe you have protective parts that started developing at 7. Maybe the angry part is 15. Who knows? But even there, that's all that part knows. He may not know that you're he, she, they, whoever they are. The part may not know that you have grown up, that you're an adult and can take care of yourself. Because we often function in parts, but until we really start doing the work and start interacting with our parts and functioning or getting having ourself influence our parts, we're just always in those different fragmented parts, and they're basically having their own whole life with each other as well. And if you're totally new to this concept, you might be like, what the fuck are you talking about? This is so weird. And I totally get that too. But maybe just hearing that, you can see how, and you can check in with yourself and just, maybe if you have one of those angry parts that are like, man, why is this thing keeps coming up? See if you can just talk to it and ask it why it's so angry. See what comes up. And then ask it some of the questions that I suggested here and see what happens. But really realizing where those parts live and how they're really missing information of the current life and what's possible. So they cannot see in the future. Parts cannot see into the future until we intentionally present it to them that this is an option. We might keep circling around the same things. So I hope that helped you understand a little bit of what might be happening inside of you. So I'm so curious to maybe hear from you if this is something you experience or if this was helpful for you. And I also just invite you to start looking at what's happening internally for you, right? That's really the first step of what we want to do. But again, this is just a little tidbit of a perspective into parts work, and you can expect more of shares in regards to parts work and possibly processes that may be helpful for you, insights that may be helpful for you to help you understand and create a little bit more compassion for the complexity of your internal world. Getting to know our own internal world can be so helpful, and really understanding that there is a lot of moving parts, so to say, in there. And yeah, I will keep sharing various aspects of how that can look like. And again, I will try to bring in these perspective of the internal family systems to give you a more structured explanation of why these things may be present and how they look like from that perspective. But also, the things that I share are often because I have experienced them within my own system. So I'm taking a lot of my information that I share from inside of me to show you that there may be a complexity within you that just from a theoretical perspective of parts work can sometimes be hard to explain. And if you enjoy that, I hope you keep listening, and there will be more to come.